Reinhard Gehlen built Hitler's intelligence network against the Soviets. In 1945, the CIA hired him to do it again. 15 years later, they discovered Soviet moles had stolen 15,000 classified documents. Reinhard Gehlen was born on April 3, 1902 in Erfurt, a regional center in central Germany shaped by the aftershocks of the First World War. In 1920, at 18, he entered the Reichswehr, a small but professional army limited to 100,000 men under the Treaty of Versailles. During the 1920s and early 30s, he rose through junior officer positions while completing rigorous training courses. His potential earned him a place at the Kriegsakademie in Berlin, one of the German military's most selective institutions. There, Gehlen studied operational planning, logistics, and foreign military doctrine, subjects that would later define his wartime role. When Adolf Hitler consolidated power in 1933, Gehlen was already positioned within the expanding General Staff. He advanced through several planning assignments and by 1939 held the rank of Major. When Germany launched the invasion of Poland on September 1, 1939, Gehlen worked within staff departments responsible for evaluating enemy deployments. His assessments weren't yet central to strategic decisions, but they provided a foundation for his future career. In 1940 and 1941, he continued serving in analytical roles as Germany fought in France and the Balkans. These campaigns gave him insight into operational planning at the highest levels of the Wehrmacht. A turning point came in early 1942. After the catastrophic early months of the war against the Soviet Union, the German Army High Command sought to reorganize its intelligence apparatus. On April 1, 1942, General Franz Halder appointed Gehlen to lead Fremde Heere Ost, Foreign Armies East, the section responsible for assessing the Red Army. The assignment placed him in one of the most critical analytical positions in Hitler's war machine. Gehlen inherited a department that lacked coherent structure and struggled to keep pace with the vast scale of the Eastern Front. Gehlen quickly expanded FHO into a more professional and methodical organization. He recruited officers with linguistic expertise, regional knowledge, and experience in Soviet affairs. Under his leadership, FHO compiled detailed assessments of Red Army divisions. His team drew on aerial reconnaissance, prisoner interrogations, signals intelligence, and captured documents. Gehlen's reports often contradicted optimistic assumptions within the German leadership, warning that the Soviet Union retained far greater resilience and manpower than Nazi planners believed. These assessments generated tension. Hitler and senior officers favored intelligence that supported planned offensives, not cautious analyses that questioned their feasibility. Gehlen's insistence on presenting sober evaluations placed him at odds with the ideological certainty that dominated strategic discussions. Yet his department remained one of the few analytical bodies within the Wehrmacht that attempted to quantify Soviet strength with measurable data rather than political expectations. Within months, Gehlen had established himself as a crucial figure within the intelligence community. His work shaped operational planning, even when his warnings went unheeded. In early 1943, the direction of the war on the Eastern Front had shifted. Germany's defeat at Stalingrad undermined the belief that the Soviet Union was close to collapse. For Gehlen and his team at FHO, the change confirmed what their reports had signaled for months. The Red Army possessed deeper reserves, stronger industrial capacity, and a greater willingness to absorb losses than Hitler anticipated. He warned that Soviet counteroffensives would intensify and that Germany lacked the manpower to maintain long defensive lines. Many of these warnings clashed with the strategic optimism favored by senior Nazi officials. This tension deepened as the front deteriorated. Gehlen's department documented the accelerating pace of Soviet rearmament and the expansion of armored and mechanized formations. His analysts produced detailed estimates of Red Army troop concentrations before the Kursk offensive in July 1943, noting the depth of defensive preparations and the likelihood of a prolonged battle. Their predictions proved accurate, but their influence remained limited. Political considerations often overrode analytical caution. As 1944 drew to a close, Gehlen reached a clear conclusion. Germany's defeat was inevitable, and Soviet intelligence dominance would shape Europe's future. At this moment, he began making preparations that would define his post-war career. He ordered the systematic microfilming of the entire FHO intelligence archive. This collection included assessments of Red Army units, partisan networks, Soviet political leadership, industrial capacity, and long-term strategic planning. The volume of material was enormous, representing years of analysis from one of the most sophisticated intelligence units in the Wehrmacht. To protect these files from destruction or Soviet capture, Gehlen directed trusted officers to transfer the microfilms into sealed metal containers. These containers were then buried in remote locations in the Bavarian Alps, particularly in the mountains near Ehlenswiese and other isolated sites accessible only to those who knew their exact coordinates. Gehlen's intent was not preservation for Germany's sake, but for negotiation. He believed the United States would value this intelligence at the dawn of the post-war order, and that it could serve as his guarantee of survival. As the Eastern Front collapsed entirely in early 1945, Gehlen's position within the Wehrmacht became increasingly strained, and in March 1945 he was dismissed from his post and placed on the Army's inactive list. This decision freed him to execute the final phase of his plan. In the final weeks of the war, Gehlen and a small group of loyal officers moved through Bavaria disguised as regular soldiers. They avoided Soviet forces and sought capture by American units advancing into southern Germany. On May 22, 1945, Gehlen surrendered to the US Army near Fischhausen on Lake Schliersee. He carried a single message: he had information the Americans needed, and he could deliver much more if they kept him alive. The files buried in the mountains would soon become the foundation of an entirely new intelligence service. When Gehlen surrendered to US forces, he presented himself not as a defeated officer, but as a specialist with assets the United States could not ignore. American military intelligence moved him to Camp King, an interrogation center near Oberursel, where officers from G2, the US Army's intelligence branch, began questioning him. Gehlen immediately disclosed two key points. He had the entire wartime archive on the Soviet Union, and he had buried it in the Alps before Germany collapsed. More importantly, he could reassemble the staff who had produced it. The timing worked in his favor. In 1945, the Western Allies still viewed the Soviet Union as a partner in victory, but tensions were rising. American planners were beginning to recognize the strategic importance of understanding Soviet capabilities. Gehlen's materials, which mapped Red Army formations, political structures, and supply networks, offered insights no other captured source could match. His interrogators took notice. Reports from Camp King soon reached senior US intelligence officials. In July 1945, the Americans transferred Gehlen and several of his officers to Washington, D.C. for further evaluation. There he met with high-ranking intelligence personnel in the Pentagon and members of the former Office of Strategic Services. These meetings were cautious but productive. Some American officials questioned whether a former Wehrmacht general should be trusted in any post-war intelligence role, while others argued that his expertise was irreplaceable as Europe entered a new geopolitical era. The debate reflected a broader uncertainty about how the United States should organize intelligence in the emerging Cold War. During these discussions, Gehlen offered a clear proposal. He would rebuild his intelligence network under US supervision, focusing entirely on the Soviet Union. The Americans would control funding, provide security, and determine priorities. Gehlen would provide the structure, personnel, and analytical capability. In return, he sought protection for himself and his staff, along with assurances they would not be handed over to the Soviet Union. By the time negotiations concluded, American officials agreed. They recognized that the Soviet Union was becoming a strategic rival, and Gehlen's organization could deliver early insight into its military buildup. In late 1945, Gehlen returned to Germany with American approval to begin operations. Over the next months, he reassembled key members of his former FHO staff. The Americans provided a secure headquarters and a estate in Pullach, south of Munich. This location soon became the center of what would be known as the Gehlen Organization. Though technically under US control, it functioned with considerable autonomy, gathering intelligence on Eastern Europe, recruiting sources, and producing analytical reports for American commanders. The organization operated quietly but quickly. Within a year, it was producing regular assessments on Soviet troop movements in Eastern Europe, political developments in occupied territories, and the formation of security services within the Soviet sphere. The Americans relied heavily on these reports during the early phases of the Cold War. Some analysts later questioned their accuracy, but at the time, the material filled a critical intelligence gap. A year after Germany's collapse, Reinhard Gehlen had achieved what would have seemed impossible. He had secured his freedom, protected his staff, and positioned himself at the center of the West's intelligence efforts. A year after the war, he was no longer a prisoner. He was now the leader of America's most important intelligence network in Europe. The following year, the Gehlen Organization had become a central pillar of American intelligence in Europe. The newly founded Central Intelligence Agency, established that same year, inherited oversight of Gehlen's network from the US Army. This partnership expanded the organization's mission, funding, and operational reach. Its primary focus remained the same: gathering intelligence on the Soviet Union, East Germany, and the wider Eastern Bloc. For the United States, which lacked deep resources inside these territories, Gehlen's reporting played an early and influential role in shaping Cold War assessments. From its headquarters in Pullach, the organization built an extensive network of informants and analysts. Many were former Wehrmacht officers or civilians with expertise in Eastern Europe. Some had questionable wartime backgrounds, a fact that later generated criticism. Supporters argued that their knowledge was essential. Critics countered that the rapid expansion allowed individuals with compromised pasts to enter the new intelligence structure. The practical demands of Cold War intelligence often outweighed concerns about personal histories. Throughout the late 1940s and early 50s, the Gehlen organization produced reports on Soviet military deployments, air force expansion, political purges, and economic planning. These assessments informed US strategy during moments of rising tension, including the Berlin blockade of 1948-49 and the Korean War. With the founding of the Federal Republic of Germany in 1949, a debate emerged over the long-term future of the organization. West German leaders, including Chancellor Konrad Adenauer, viewed intelligence capability as essential for state sovereignty. After negotiations with the United States, the network was formally transferred to West German control. On April 1, 1956, it became the Bundesnachrichtendienst, the Federal Intelligence Service. Reinhard Gehlen was appointed its first president. Leading a national intelligence service brought new challenges. Gehlen now answered not only to the CIA but also to the West German government, which expected modern structures, oversight, and accountability. Critics within the government argued that his management style resembled wartime staff practices rather than the contemporary administrative standards. Then came the scandals. In 1961, investigators uncovered one of the most damaging security breaches in Cold War espionage. Heinz Pfeffer, a senior BND officer and former SS lieutenant, had been feeding secrets to Moscow for years. When arrested, Pfeffer and two other Soviet moles, Hans Clemons and Erwin Tiebel, confessed to transmitting over 15,000 classified documents to the KGB. The CIA later called it a catastrophic penetration. The revelation destroyed confidence in Gehlen's leadership. His reliance on former wartime colleagues had created vulnerabilities he either couldn't see or refused to address. Despite these problems, the BND expanded its capabilities and influence. Under Gehlen, it developed signals intelligence operations, deepened its analysis of Eastern Bloc politics, and cooperated closely with Western partners. As the 1960s progressed, criticism of his leadership had grown. Pressure from both West German officials and international partners led to his retirement in 1968. After leaving the BND, Gehlen lived quietly near Munich. In 1971, he published his memoir, The Service, offering a selective account of his career. The book downplayed internal controversies and emphasized his role in shaping Western intelligence strategy. Reinhard Gehlen died on June 8, 1979, and was buried in the Waldfriedhof in Munich. If you enjoyed this video, watch Heinrich Müller, the Gestapo chief who vanished after World War II, next. And as always, like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more History Inside. And we'll see you in the next one.